Greetings, everyone. Damien Dumar here, publisher of The Last Harvest by Lucy and Mars, available below on Amazon in digital, physical, and in audiobook formats. So no excuse not to read it. You can listen to it while you drive your car, while you burn calories on the treadmill. No reason not to learn what is in this very good book. I had announced in previous podcasts that every week I would be covering more and more sections of Project 2025 and going through it. But after the first few videos, I decided to go through the entire 1,000-page Project 2025 document and read it. And then, because I was scheduled to go on Jeff Rent's radio, and we did an entire show where I talked all about Project 2025 and what is most important for people to know about what is inside that document, since most people, let's face it, are not going to read a 1,000-page document. And the authors of Project 2025 are counting on that, actually. So there's a lot of information out there on the internet. People talk about what's in Project 2025, but having read the entire document, I come to the conclusion that many people who make videos on the subject haven't actually read the material, because they say things that are not accurate, or they focus on the wrong things because they miss things which are very important. So I'm going to be posting below a link to this program on Rents if people want to hear me talk in great detail about it. But if I was going to give a quick summary about Project 2025, one of the biggest dangers in the document is the notion of ending the separation between church and state. And so there are quite a few references in Project 2025 that are proposing flagrant violations of the separation between church and state. I'm not interested in living in a theocracy, and I'm sure most people are not interested as well. Some maybe, but most people don't. This idea of keeping true to the original intent of the founders and the Constitution is something that's very important. And another aspect of Project 2025 which really stands out is the authors, and there are many people who contributed to authoring this document. It wasn't just one individual. They have an absolute obsession with abortion, to the point, I can't tell you how many times abortion is mentioned in the document. It's mentioned in places where there really isn't even a context for it. Any excuse they have to start talking about abortion, they take that opportunity. And they're very clear that their intent is a federal, nationwide ban on abortions, abortion pills, morning after pills, which technically are contraceptive pills and not abortion pills. And at one point in the document, they even, how should I say, frown on condoms and set this tone that they would like to get rid of birth control if they could. It's not said explicitly, that part, but it's implied there. And it's not a stretch of the imagination, given their obsession with stopping abortion and increasing the population and the birth rate. And again, why are the authors of Project 2025 obsessed with the idea of increasing the number of newborn children? And the answer is because newborn children are the only candidates for successful hybridization and implantation of neural chips. So they're going to need a future slave population once they accomplish their goal of reducing the population by 90%, as is outlined in The Last Harvest by Lucy and Mars and inscribed on the Georgia Guidestones. So the elite are not shy about reducing the population 90%, but how are you going to hybridize and enslave the survivors? They're not ideal. They're adults already. So you need children, and that's why this push to make babies, Trump saying he wants to create freedom cities and have financial benefits to make as many children as possible. This is why Elon Musk advocates for having as many children as possible. And the elite suddenly seem to be pushing having many children, despite the fact that for many years, and on the Georgia Guidestones, they talk about reducing the population. So why would they want to reduce the population and at the same time encourage massive spike in birth rates? And the answer is because children, babies specifically, are the ideal candidates for implanting chips and genetically hybridizing them. And this is something people need to keep in mind. It might sound far-fetched, but if you read The Last Harvest by Lucy and Mars, if you read a lot of the articles that have been reprinted on thelastharvest.info that were originally written by Lucy and Mars, all of this will start to make a hell of a lot of sense, pun intended. So this is something that is very, very important for people to be aware of. And naturally, this idea of getting rid of the right of a woman to have autonomy over her own body is really throwing us back into a time that I'm sure most people do not want to live in. So I know I don't want to live in a time like that. So with that being said, I recommend that people listen to this broadcast I did on Rents Radio. It's going to be linked below in the description. And one can learn all about Project 2025 because I talk about everything that's in there that's really critical within the context of The Last Harvest by Lucy and Mars. So again, I encourage people to check it out. Now, in the news lately, there have been some very interesting events. Here we have an article from Rolling Stone, and it's all over the place, where Trump tells Christians they won't have to vote in future. We'll have it fixed. And this ties into earlier articles I've covered in past episodes of the Last Harvest podcast, where Trump talks about how in the future there will be no more elections and there's going to be civil unrest. And here we have a continuation of this theme where he says they won't have to vote in the future. We'll have it fixed. That sounds pretty bizarre. And here's the actual quote. Quote, you have to get out and vote. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 years, it will be fixed. It will be fine. You won't have to vote anymore. In 4 years, you won't have to vote again. Now, some people may hear this and they'll say, well, it will be fixed. Oh, he's really talking about how the country will be fixed. You don't have to worry about voting again. But that's a real stretch there. It'll be fixed because Trump will be a dictator and the Project 2025 Christian rights zealots will be in total control. That's why you won't have to vote anymore. Some people in the comments of my earlier YouTube videos have said such things like, well, we have term limits, so there's no way that Trump could make himself a dictator, but they failed to understand, and they would understand if they read The Last Harvest by Lucy and Mars, that all the president has to do at any time is declare state of emergency, martial law, and all elections are suspended. I've gone over in past videos and podcasts the numerous executive orders that give the president full legal authority to do so. So for those of you who think, well, we have term limits, there's no way that Trump could make himself a dictator, you're completely wrong. So it's something to think about here. And this is this idea that you'll never have to vote again. Here we see it on ABC News. Trump tells voters they won't have to vote again if he's elected. We have the same thing coming out again. So when he says it'll be fixed, it's an interesting choice of words. Does he mean that the fix is in, that the election will be fixed? Does this mean that the country will be fixed? I think we all know what it means. It means that he will make himself a dictator, and that's what it will be fixed means, meaning that you don't need to vote anymore. It's pretty obvious, and Trump has done this over and over where he talks about there's going to be a bloodbath, and people say, oh, he was just talking about the auto industry. No, he's not. And for those who still don't think that this is what he means by this, let's check this out here. On the Maddow blog on MSNBC, the question is put forth, why in the world does Trump keep saying we don't need the votes? And here it says, you don't need to be an expert in electoral politics to understand Rule 1 of any campaign. Candidates should pursue as many votes as possible. In a democracy, it's common sense. The more votes a campaign has, the greater the chance of success. With this in mind, Donald Trump appears to have a counterintuitive rhetorical habit. The New Republic noted, as a clip from the show makes clear, the former president didn't appear to be kidding. Again, didn't appear to be kidding. And if the phrasing sounded at all familiar, it's not your imagination. The day after last month's presidential debate, for example, Trump held a rally in Virginia and told attendees, quote, we don't need votes, end quote. A week earlier, the Republicans spoke at a far-right conference and said roughly the same thing. Quote, I tell my people I don't need any votes, end quote. Adding, quote, we don't need the votes, end quote. That came on the heels of the GOP nominee pushing the same line during an appearance in Detroit. Quote, listen, we don't need votes, end quote. And then he goes again, quote, we don't need votes, we have to stop, focus, don't worry about votes, end quote. And then he told another New Hampshire audience in October, don't worry about voting. The voting, we got plenty of votes. Now, what does this mean? To keep saying, don't worry about voting, we don't need votes. Why would Trump say something like that? Especially given that in the past he has said he doesn't care about you, he just wants your vote. So why would he now keep emphasizing that we don't need votes? Well, it ties right in with the story here that voters won't have to vote again if he's elected because it will be fixed. End quote. So what does this mean? Well, Trump is basically telling you that the outcome of the election is fixed already. The fix is in. So Kamala Harris may easily defeat Trump. When you look at the popularity that she's currently experiencing, the surge in contributors and Gen Z voters coming out, in certain key states where they're going neck and neck, a sudden turnout like this, a surge of undecided voters, a surge of disinterested voters suddenly getting interested and decided on Kamala, that could be very decisive. However, if it's fixed, then it really doesn't matter. Why else would Trump keep saying we don't need votes? It makes no sense over and over. Or you won't have to vote again after this time, don't worry. And notice the contradiction. You won't have to vote again, but we also don't need votes. Like, how cocky is this guy? He knows. And some people would say, well, how can this be that they fixed the election? Well, it's actually quite simple. All it takes is for one particular state to declare that they feel that there has been election tampering or something is wrong, and refuse to certify the results of an election. And this creates a legal quagmire that ultimately will get pushed up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, which is stacked in favor of Trump, by Trump, and for Trump, is going to hand him the election. That's the only possible explanation here. So this is what we have to look forward to, that Trump is going to be president no matter what happens. And can that lead to a potential civil war? It certainly can. But before you think, oh, civil war, keep in mind, civil war is a perfect emergency that I talked about earlier that would allow Trump to make use of all the executive orders that are listed here in The Last Harvest by Lucien Mars, trigger a state of martial law, and make himself perpetual dictator. Doesn't have to call himself that. Listen, Putin even says that he's gotten elected, but we all know that it's not exactly what happens there. And Trump admires Putin. He would take the same stance. Oh, no, I'm not a dictator. I'm still the president, but it's for your own safety. Everything's always for your own safety. So this is very significant. And we're almost in November. It's a few days until a few days until August. August, September, October. It's 3 months now. 3 months. And as they get closer, the confidence starts to spill out. And here we see it. Another item here of interest that I noticed that is very significant, as significant as the number of new voters and Gen Z voters who are turning out for Kamala, is on the other side, we have a situation here where Tucker Carlson, his podcast has actually surpassed Joe Rogan's and become the most popular podcast in America. And here we see the Tucker Carlson show is number one, dethroned the Joe Rogan Experience. That is quite impressive. It says a lot. Joe Rogan, he appeals to a very broad base of individuals, and he's been on top for so long, and there are good reasons for it. If you watch his show, then you have Tucker Carlson. Really? Tucker Carlson has supplanted Joe Rogan. This is a serious. The alarm bells should be going off here. It shows that there is a real surge in a certain voting demographic. And the future is going to be very interesting. That's for sure. Here we have this article. Elon Musk, his Neuralink chip, he announces a Neuralink wireless brain implant. So he reveals that his company has successfully implanted a wireless brain chip in a human for the first time. So there you have it. We're moving along in the direction that is outlined in the last harvest. It's very scary. We have Elon Musk's Neuralink chip. We have British Telecom soul catcher chip. And that's what the chip does. It catches your soul. Traps you in the matrix forever. So you don't want to get that. And if you look around, you can easily see the evidence of how we begin to drift into this direction. How many stores are there that no longer take cash? There are so many. A few years ago, that would have been unheard of. I was in Whole Foods today buying some spring water, and they now have an option there where you can scan your palm and pay. I'm not even sure how that works, but that's very close to the mark of the beast being in the hand or the head. They're setting the stage so you can be chipped. You might notice that first they put the chips in your credit cards. Oh, you don't need to swipe the card. What was wrong with swiping a card? Oh, and there's a chip now. You insert the card and the chip reads it. Oh, it's for your advanced security. Come on. No, it's not. You're getting used to the idea of paying with a chip. First in the card, then it's going to be in your hand. Pay with the phone. Next thing you know, the technology's in your head. Get used to not paying with cash. That's how they start to go cashless and take away your freedoms. Next thing, oh, we're going to have blockchain, digital currency, no more cash at all. And then you're under total surveillance and totally under their control. So these are all very scary things. We keep moving forward in this direction, and there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. And just like when, during the pandemic, companies were like, well, you take the V or you don't have a job. And in Europe, in many countries, it was, you take the V or you can't buy groceries and eat. It was like a giant social experiment in a way, getting people used to what was to come. So what would happen in the future if they say, well, due to a nuclear attack on New York City and worldwide chaos and a reform of the currency system, which they have planned, well, for now, for your safety and security, we're going to implant a chip in you. And any transaction you make has to be with that chip. Of course, no one's going to force you to have the chip, but if you don't have the chip, you can't buy food and you will starve to death. Well, if it comes down to that, you're better off eating a bullet. Just kill yourself, because otherwise you get your soul trapped here forever in the matrix. And you don't want that. It's better to just kill yourself. And this is where we're headed. And for those who don't believe it, here's a book I got off on Amazon. It's published by the Department of the Army. It's called Internment and Resettlement Operations, FM 3-39.40. In this book, they tell you exactly how, in great detail, they are going to operate the concentration camps that FEMA has in North America that have the capacity to hold over 20 million people already. They're telling you it's in this book. They're getting very brave. We're getting closer and closer to the end. Yeah, we don't need your votes. Don't worry about it. The fix is in. It'll be fixed. Last time you ever need to vote. Oh, by the way, if you're interested on Amazon, here, learn how we're going to run the concentration camps that you're going to be in. Not a problem. It's all explained in The Last Harvest. Sure, half the book is about aliens and things that are in the field of speculation, even though in the back of this book we publish all the NASA laws governing your interaction with extraterrestrials. So how speculative can it really be if NASA is writing laws governing your contact with extraterrestrials? But either way, even if someone wants to continue to put their head in the sand, the other half of the book is all quotes by your leaders that back up what's on the Georgia Guidestones, that they're going to kill 90% of you through various vectors of depopulation, such as war, starvation, famines, biological warfare. In the year in which everything really starts to kick off is 2025. Shows up over and over. I've talked about it in endless podcasts, articles, interviews. It's in the book, on the website, it's on thelastharvest.info. We're almost there. We're almost in 2025. We're 3 months away from the election, a few more months away from 2025. So take it serious. And on that note, I encourage you to have a good week. Buy The Last Harvest. Spend your week listening to the audiobook. Learn what's in it. What have you got to lose? On that note, see you next week.